Welcome to Timeline Twist, where we turn back the pages of history and twist the timeline in ways no one ever expected. Today, we dive into one of the most pivotal moments of the modern world, the Battle of Waterloo, and ask a simple, yet haunting question. What if Napoleon had won? June 1815. On the damp fields of Waterloo in Belgium, human history reached a crossroads. Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor who once made all of Europe tremble, stood before his final chance to reverse his fate. But he failed, and the world moved in a completely different direction. But what if Napoleon had won at Waterloo? What if Wellington had been crushed? The Prussians arrived hours too late, and the Seventh Coalition collapsed on the spot. Would Europe have once again fallen under the heel of a renewed French Empire? Or would Napoleon spiral into an endless cycle of war? This is not just a question about a battle. It is a scenario that could have reshaped the entire 19th century and perhaps the modern world. Let's rewind the clock. Napoleon was not just a brilliant general. He was the embodiment of a storm of revolution, reform, and conquest. From an obscure officer on the island of Corsica, he rose to become emperor, defeating most of Europe's great powers and building a new order where the values of the French Revolution were exported at the point of a bayonet. But after the disastrous Russian campaign in 1812 and exile to Elba, many believed his story was over. Until he returned dramatically and unexpectedly in March 1815, beginning his final 100 days. If at Waterloo, Napoleon had achieved a decisive victory, meaning he completely destroyed Wellington's British forces and Blücher's Prussians, the immediate result would be the psychological collapse of the anti-French alliance. Wellington had been Britain's great hope, a symbol of invincibility. If he were killed or captured, Britain's image as a bulwark against Napoleon would be shattered. The Prussians, already battered after Ligny, would be forced to retreat eastward, leaving a massive gap for the French to advance into the Rhineland. From there, Napoleon would gain what he always craved, a chance to negotiate from a position of strength. He wouldn't need to conquer all of Europe again. He just needed a victory loud enough to force the other powers to the negotiating table and recognize him as the legitimate emperor of France. Would the other great powers accept this? That's the real question. Britain and Prussia might insist on continuing the war, but after a crushing defeat at Waterloo, they would need months to reorganize. Russia, with its army thousands of kilometers away, wouldn't be able to intervene in time. Austria, always cautious, might choose neutrality. In that isolation, a victorious Napoleon could offer peace on reasonable terms. Recognition of France's borders before 1812, no restoration of the Bourbon monarchy, and preservation of the social reforms he had established. Peaceful Europe under Napoleon, once unthinkable, would now be within reach. But it wouldn't stop there. If he kept his throne after Waterloo, Napoleon could begin restructuring France. The final years of his previous reign had been chaotic. Endless war, political turmoil, a devastated economy. But with time and the prestige of a victor, he could stabilize the state, restore the national finances, and complete the unfinished legal reforms, notably the Napoleonic Code, which remains a foundation for many modern legal systems. However, Napoleon was not one to rest in times of peace. He was a man of motion, of constant momentum. Once his power was reestablished, he wouldn't sit still. And here lies the heart of this alternate history. Would a victorious Napoleon know when to stop? Or would he continue the path of conquest until fate brought him down again? There are reasons to believe that had he won at Waterloo, Napoleon would have changed his strategy. He once said, "I am too old to be Caesar forever." Upon returning to Paris in 1815, he enacted a series of democratic reforms, restored freedom of the press, and re-established a constitutional monarchy. These were signs that he sought to become a constitutional ruler, not a military dictator. Perhaps he had learned from past failures. A new French empire, based on constitutional principles and internal stability, could have become the leading power in 19th century Europe, displacing Britain. And here's a weighty possibility. Had Napoleon remained in power, the Industrial Revolution might have unfolded under France's influence. Instead of London, perhaps Paris would have become the capital of the modern world. Finance, science, and technology all could have developed in a completely different direction. The global colonial system would have changed too. A victorious France might have expanded into North Africa decades earlier. Vietnam, Algeria, even Egypt territories that later fell to European empires could have become stable parts of Napoleon's imperial network. But what truly undermined Napoleon was not external enemies. It was time and the erosion of ideals. He was a genius, but one who believed too much in destiny. If he had continued to rule, it's likely he would have slid back into authoritarianism and been overthrown by the very people who once worshipped him as a demigod. Moreover, a victorious Napoleon would have altered the entire global balance of power. The United States, still young at the time, might not have had the space or time to rise as it did in reality. A strong France in Europe could have intervened. In Latin America, challenging British and Spanish influence, the world might have seen a France-US rivalry overshaping the future of liberal democracy. And the modern world, with the United Nations, the European Union, and NATO, might never have existed. There would be no American-led global order, but a multipolar world where Paris was the center of global decision-making. Yet every glory comes at a cost. A victorious Napoleon might have left Europe forever trapped in his shadow. Democratic revolutions across Germany, Italy, and Eastern Europe could have been delayed or crushed. A Pax Napoleonica, Napoleon-style peace would bring stability, but also suffocation. And when he died, who would succeed him? No one really knows. The scenario of Napoleon winning at Waterloo is not just a historical what-if. It's a powerful reminder that seemingly small moments, like a few hours of rain delaying French artillery, can shape the destiny of humanity. One different choice, one different turn of fate, and the world as we know it might never have come to be. History is never fair and never allows for what-ifs. But that's exactly why we must look back, to understand the value of every decision, every person, every battle. Waterloo wasn't just Napoleon's defeat. It was the beginning of a new century, one in which Europe had no single emperor, but was instead divided by rivalry, war, and eventually 2 world wars. And you, if you were living in a world where Napoleon had won, would you be living under a glorious empire or inside a gilded prison? This is Timeline Twist, where every small turn in history could lead to an entirely different outcome. If you found this video compelling, don't forget to leave a like, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe so you don't miss the next time we twist the timeline. Thanks for watching.